My first guest is a good friend, and I think Jack Lemmon is probably one of the, if you had to choose 4 to 5 of the top actors in the entire world, he would be. He's one of the most versatile performers I have ever met in my life.
For 30 years, millions of Americans invited Johny Carson into their homes every single night. They laughed at his jokes, watched him interview the biggest stars in the world, and felt like they knew him personally. But behind that warm smile and those quick one-liners was a man that almost nobody really understood. Here's what Johny Carson reveals about what most fans never figured out. The Nebraska boy who never quite left home. Johny Carson was born on October 23, 1925 in Corning, Iowa. When he was 8 years old, his family moved to Norfolk, Nebraska, where his father managed the local power company. Nebraska was where Johny grew up, and Norfolk was where he discovered his love for entertaining people. At 12 years old, Johny found a book about magic tricks. He ordered a magician's kit through the mail and started practicing. By the time he was 14, he was performing as the Great Carsoni at local venues around Norfolk. He'd set up his magician's stand with the name printed on black velvet cloth, and he'd perform for his mother's bridge club, at Methodist church socials, and at the Norfolk Rotary Club. That 14-year-old kid earning money doing magic tricks had no idea he'd one day become the most famous person in America. But something about that small-town Nebraska upbringing stuck with Johny his entire life. Friends and colleagues noticed it. There was a certain Midwestern quality to him, a reserve, a politeness, a reluctance to brag or show off. Even when he became the king of late-night television, making millions of dollars and interviewing presidents and movie stars, there was something fundamentally humble about the way he carried himself on camera. The war that changed everything. In 1943, right after graduating high school, Johny enlisted in the United States Navy. He was 18 years old and the country was deep into World War II. He served as a commissioned officer with the rank of ensign aboard the battleship USS Pennsylvania in the Pacific. While Carson didn't see active combat, he was there when the armistice was signed. Something interesting happened on that ship. The wiry young man from Nebraska developed an interest in boxing and compiled an impressive amateur record of 10 wins and 0 losses. He had found something he was good at, performing under pressure, staying calm when things got intense, reading his opponent and reacting quickly. Those skills would serve him well in a very different arena years later. When the war ended, Johny came home and enrolled at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. He studied radio and speech with a minor in physics. His senior thesis was a 45-minute recording titled "How to Write Comedy for Radio." In it, he examined comedy timing and delivery techniques that would define the next 45 years of his career. The long road to New York. After graduating in 1949, Johny got a job at radio station WOW in Omaha. He created a morning show called The Squirrel's Nest that showcased his improvisational skills. But Johny had bigger dreams. In 1951, he packed up and moved to Los Angeles. The early days in Hollywood were rough. For months, he couldn't find work. Finally, he landed a job at KNXT reading the station call letters, the time, and the weather. It wasn't glamorous, but it was Hollywood. Eventually, he got his own show called Carson's Cellar. Many of the skits and characters that would later become famous on The Tonight Show first appeared on that little local program. Johny caught a break when he was hired as a writer for the Red Skelton Hour. One night, Skelton was injured backstage right before the show, and Johny had to substitute for him. He delivered his first monologue before a national audience, and suddenly network executives started paying attention to this quick-witted young man from Nebraska. In 1957, Johny moved to New York to host a daytime game show on ABC called Who Do You Trust? That's where he met Ed McMahon, who would become his sidekick and announcer for the next 35 years. The show ran from 1957 to 1962 and became one of the hottest programs on daytime television. Johny had finally made it to the big time. Taking over The Tonight Show. On October 1st, 1962, Johny Carson became the host of The Tonight Show, replacing Jack Paar. He was 36 years old. The first year was difficult. The ratings wavered and Johny had serious doubts about whether he was the right person for the job. But he stuck with it, and gradually, the show found its rhythm. Ed McMahon would walk out and deliver that famous introduction, "Here's Johny." Then Johny would stride through the curtain to thunderous applause. He'd deliver his monologue, 16 to 22 one-liners, never more than 3 on the same subject, and finish with his trademark phantom golf swing aimed at the orchestra. Then came the interviews, the sketches, the comedy bits. Johny created memorable characters that became part of American culture. There was Karnak the Magnificent, the all-knowing seer who could divine the answers to questions sealed in envelopes. There was Aunt Blabby, the cantankerous old lady who Ed McMahon would interview about elder affairs. There was Floyd R. Turbo, the stereotypical working man in a plaid hunting coat offering editorial responses to current events. The show was broadcast from New York for its first decade. Then, in May 1972, Johnny made a decision that would reshape the entire television industry. He moved The Tonight Show to Burbank, California. That move shifted the center of power in television from the East Coast to the West Coast, from Broadway to Hollywood. After May 1973, the show remained in Burbank for the rest of Johnny's career. The man nobody really knew. Here's what most fans never figured out about Johnny Carson. The person they saw on television every night was nothing like the person he was in real life. On camera, Johnny was smooth, confident, quick with a joke, at ease with everyone from politicians to movie stars to ordinary people with unusual talents. He seemed like the most extroverted person in America. Comfortable being the center of attention, relaxed in front of millions of viewers, able to chat effortlessly about anything. Off camera, Johnny Carson was painfully shy. Dick Cavett, who knew Johnny well and hosted his own late-night talk show, remembered it clearly. "I felt sorry for Johnny in that he was so socially uncomfortable," Cavett said. "I've hardly ever met anybody who had as hard of a time as he did." Documentary filmmaker Peter Jones, who made a film about Carson, put it this way: "He was the most famous person in America, yet there was something unknowable about him. He was this suave, debonair person on TV who was very nervous at parties because he was so awkward making small talk. He carried a deck of cards and would do magic tricks just to ease the tension." Johnny avoided large parties. He rarely gave interviews. He was called the most private public man who ever lived. When people tried to chat with him in the hallways after the show, he'd become visibly uncomfortable. Dick Cavett remembered having to rescue Johnny from these situations, making up excuses to help him escape. Andrew Nichols, who was Johnny's head writer from 1988 to 1992, explained it this way: "He was a classic introvert, the kind of person who's recharged by being alone and depleted by being among people. He'd get into his car with a palpable sense of relief after a show, like, 'That was good. Now I'd like to be alone in the dark, listening to jazz.' He didn't socialize much. He saved his energy for performance." In a 1979 interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, Johnny acknowledged the contradiction himself. "If I pulled out my old high school annual book and read some of the things, people might say, 'Oh, he's conceited, he's aloof.' Actually, that was more shy. See, when I'm in front of an audience, it's a different thing. If I'm in front of an audience, I can feel comfortable. I'm in control." That was the key. Johnny needed to be in control. In front of an audience, with the cameras on, he could control everything: the timing, the conversation, the mood. But in social situations without that structure, he was lost. The daily routine. Most fans had no idea what Johnny's typical day looked like. He had a very specific routine that he followed religiously. Every morning, Johnny would wake up and spend time reading half a dozen newspapers and magazines, looking for material for that evening's monologue. He was a man of habit and routine. At 1 p.m., his family cook, Lisette, would give him lunch in a brown paper bag. Then he'd get into his Mercedes sports car and drive himself 40 minutes to NBC in Burbank. No chauffeur, no entourage, just Johnny alone in his car. 5 minutes after arriving, he'd sit down with Fred DeCordova, The Tonight Show's producer and his good friend, to talk about that evening's guests. At 5:10 p.m., Ed McMahon would show up. They'd go over the show, and then it was showtime. But here's something most people didn't know. Johnny had a pre-show ritual that helped him deal with his anxiety. Comedian Tom Dreesen, who appeared on The Tonight Show 50 times, explained it. "He never interacted with you before the show because he felt it would give away the energy, and he hated commercials because he didn't have a lot to say. I would prepare things to talk about in between commercials so I could interact with him." Johnny needed that distance before the show. He needed to save his energy, to get into the right headspace. Once the cameras started rolling, he could turn it on, but until that moment, he kept to himself. The relationship with his mother. Johnny's complicated personality had roots in his childhood, specifically in his relationship with his mother, Ruth. Johnny rarely talked about his mother publicly, but when he did, it wasn't pleasant. He once said, "She's the toughest son of a bitch of them all. There is no goddamn way to please that woman. She's Lady Macbeth. My marriages failed because she messed me up." When Ruth Carson died, Johny didn't attend her funeral. Instead, he reportedly said, "The Wicked Witch is dead." That cold, difficult relationship with his mother seemed to affect Johnny's ability to form close relationships throughout his life. He was married 4 times. His first marriage to Jody Wolcott in 1949 produced 3 sons, but ended in divorce in 1963. He married Joanne Copeland later that year, but that marriage ended in 1972. He married Joanna Holland in 1972 and divorced her in 1983. Finally, in 1987, he married Alexis Moss, and they stayed together until his death. Johnny's relationships with his sons were also troubled. His son Rick struggled with mental health issues and was eventually committed to a mental hospital. Johny refused to visit him. On June 21, 1991, Rick's car plummeted 125 feet down an embankment in Cayucos, California. Rick died instantly. Only after his death did Johny pay tribute to him on the show. The problem with Bob Hope. Most fans loved seeing Bob Hope on The Tonight Show. Hope was a comedy legend, and his appearances were usually big events. But behind the scenes, Johny Carson absolutely dreaded having Bob Hope as a guest. The problem was simple. Bob Hope wouldn't have a real conversation. Everything was scripted. Every response was pre-planned. Andrew Nichols, one of the show's writers, explained, "There was nothing spontaneous about Hope. He was a guy who relied on his writers for every topic." Producer Peter Lassley remembered the dynamic. Johny would go, "Again?" And I'd say, "Do you want to tell him no?" And he'd say, "No." As Hope got older and his hearing and eyesight failed, the appearances became even more difficult. Hope would have trouble picking up Johnny's questions. Johny had to stick precisely to the notes his staff gave him, because if he asked a question out of order, Hope might answer a completely different question. The whole thing was awkward and painful, broadcast live to millions of viewers. After one particularly difficult appearance, Johny told his staff, "If I ever end up like that, guys, I want you to shoot me." The loneliness of fame. For all his success, Johny Carson was a lonely man. Ed McMahon once said, "Johny was comfortable in front of 20 million people and completely uncomfortable in front of 20. Johnny's nephew, Jeff Sotzing, who became president of the Carson Entertainment Group, remembered his uncle as a very good listener, and that's a dying art. He really knew how to carry a conversation on the air. He was extremely funny and very fast. He was able to react to almost anything, but that gift only worked when the cameras were on. When they turned off, Johny retreated into himself. He didn't attend the big Hollywood parties. He didn't socialize with other celebrities. He preferred quiet nights at home, listening to jazz music in the dark." Actress Diane Cannon, who appeared on the show many times and knew Johny well, described their relationship as a love affair that never became physical. "How do I describe a relationship where you're so intimate with somebody and yet you haven't been intimate physically?" she said. "We were closer than that." Even Johnny's closest confidants struggled to really know him. Henry Bushkin, who was Johnny's lawyer and friend for 18 years, wrote a memoir about his time with Carson. In it, he quoted Sonny Werblin, who worked with Johny, as saying, "Jack Benny was the unhappiest man I have ever known, and Benny is Carson's idol. Johny is the second unhappiest person I've ever known." The magic that never left. Throughout his entire life, Johny never stopped practicing magic. That 12-year-old kid who ordered a magician's kit through the mail in Norfolk, Nebraska, kept at it for decades. He was so skilled that he was eventually awarded the title of Master Magician from the Magic Castle in Hollywood. Johny incorporated magic into The Tonight Show regularly, performing tricks for his audience. But more than that, he used magic as a social crutch. When he found himself at parties or social gatherings where he felt uncomfortable, he'd pull out his deck of cards and start doing tricks. It gave him something to do with his hands, something to focus on besides small talk, a way to entertain people without having to really talk to them. The magic was more than just a hobby. It was a metaphor for Johnny's entire life. He was a magician after all, someone who creates illusions, who makes the audience see one thing while something else entirely is happening. Every night on The Tonight Show, Johny Carson performed the greatest magic trick of his career. He made millions of people believe they knew him. The power he wielded. By the 1970s and 1980s, Johny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was a kingmaker. An appearance on The Tonight Show could launch a career or revive one that was fading. Comedians lived for the moment when, after their set, Johny would wave them over to the couch. That was the signal that you'd made it, that Johny approved, that your career was about to take off. Comedian Robert Klein made 97 appearances on The Tonight Show over the years. He said, "He's one of the most important people in my life, and we were not personal friends. Appearances on that show were everything. I am a creature of The Tonight Show. That was the vertebra of my career." Comedian George Wallace felt the same way. An invitation to The Tonight Show was a necessary bullet point on any comedian's resume. And after the routine ended, comedians would look nervously at Johnny's desk, waiting to see if he'd give them the OK signal to come sit down. Johnny had become more than just an entertainer. He was the arbiter of American taste. When he made a joke about something, it became part of the national conversation the next morning. When he endorsed a product or mentioned a book, sales would skyrocket. In 1973, he made a joke about a toilet paper shortage, and it actually caused a run on toilet paper in stores across America. People believed Johny Carson. At his peak, The Tonight Show drew 17 million viewers every night. To put that in perspective, that's more than triple the size of all three current network late-night shows combined. Johny Carson was the most recognizable person in America. Steve Martin said he was certainly the most recognizable person in the United States during his era. The move to Burbank. When Johnny moved The Tonight Show from New York to Burbank in 1972, he changed more than just his own show. He changed the entire entertainment industry. Before that move, New York was the center of television production. The big networks were headquartered there. The important shows were broadcast from there. Broadway was still the pinnacle of American entertainment, but Johnny's move to California signaled a shift. Hollywood became the new center. The Tonight Show started taping in the early evening instead of broadcasting live late at night. This became the standard format for talk shows. What Johnny did, everyone else eventually copied. The show also changed from 90 minutes to 60 minutes during this period. That shorter format, recorded earlier in the day, became the norm for late-night television. The spontaneity and sense of danger that live performance brought was replaced with something more controlled and predictable. But it worked. The Tonight Show remained the dominant force in late-night television. The drinking problem. Johny Carson had a complicated relationship with alcohol. In his 1979 interview with Mike Wallace, Johnny acknowledged it directly. "I did not drink well," he said. "When I did drink, rather than a lot of people who become fun-loving and gregarious and love everybody, I would go the opposite, and it would happen just like that." Johnny could become mean when he drank. His temperament would shift suddenly, and the charming man who made millions laugh could turn cold and cruel. His lawyer Henry Bushkin described him as having a mood that could go from up to down in milliseconds. In 1982, Johnny was arrested for drinking and driving. He pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge. After that, he seems to have gotten his drinking under better control, but it remained an issue throughout his life. At NBC's lavish 25th anniversary party for Johnny in October 1987, his son Rick showed up and got drunk. When Johnny checked on him, the two got into a screaming fight right there in front of network executives, media representatives, family, and friends. Johnny was declared the aggressor in the argument and appeared ready to punch Rick before someone stopped him. It was an ugly scene that showed a side of Johnny most people never saw. The temper, the inability to connect with his own children, the darkness that lurked beneath the smooth television persona. The smoking habit. One thing that eventually had to be hidden on The Tonight Show was Johnny's smoking. In the early years, Johnny smoked on camera regularly. Cigarettes were just part of life in the 1960s, and nobody thought much about it. But as public attitudes towards smoking changed, Johnny's cigarettes became a problem. He started hiding them, keeping them off camera, even though he continued to smoke heavily. The NBC archive lost most of the Tonight Show episodes from the 1960s, and some people have speculated that one reason was to erase those early images of Johnny smoking on air. Johnny himself was aware of the problem. He once joked, "I should go to one of those places where they shock you or do something or show you old reruns of Gilligan's Island to make you give up smoking." He told Mike Wallace that smoking was compulsive for him, that he felt guilty about it given all the press about the dangers of smoking, but he couldn't quit. In the end, those cigarettes killed him. Johnny died on January 23, 2005, from respiratory failure caused by emphysema. He was 79 years old. He used to say about his cigarettes, "These things are killing me." He was right. The retirement that shocked NBC. When Johnny announced his retirement in 1991, it caught NBC completely by surprise. He made the announcement at Carnegie Hall to an assemblage of network brass who hadn't seen it coming. Bill Carter, then the TV reporter for the New York Times, said, "It drove NBC crazy. They had no press release. They didn't know what to do." Johnny had kept his plans completely secret. That was typical of him. He played his cards close to the vest, never revealing more than necessary, always maintaining control of his own narrative. His final Tonight Show appearance on May 22, 1992, attracted an estimated 50 million viewers, the largest audience in the program's history. It was an emotional farewell. The show played a montage of highlights from his 30 years as host, and Johnny responded, "If I could magically somehow make that tape you just saw run backward, I'd like to do the whole thing all over again." The succession of The Tonight Show became one of the most controversial moments in television history. There was fierce competition between David Letterman and Jay Leno. Johnny had not been consulted about NBC's plans to name Leno as his successor. Many people, including Leno himself, believed Johnny would have preferred Letterman. After his retirement, Johnny made his position clear without saying a word. He made his last television appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman on CBS in 1994, not on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. That appearance spoke volumes about who Johnny considered his true successor. The quiet final years. After leaving The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson disappeared from public life almost completely. He didn't do interviews, he didn't make appearances, he didn't write a memoir, he simply vanished. Johnny spent his final years quietly. He traveled on his yacht. He spent time with his fourth wife, Alexis Moss, who had been with him since 1987. He gave generously to charity. In 2010, it was revealed that his foundation received $156 million from his personal trust, making it by far the largest Hollywood charity. Johnny also stayed connected to the University of Nebraska, the school where he'd studied radio and speech in the late 1940s. He made significant donations to support the theater and film department, leading to the creation of the Johny Carson School of Theater and Film. An endowed scholarship fund continues to support Nebraska students. He occasionally sent jokes to David Letterman, who would use them in his monologues. But other than that, Johnny stayed out of the spotlight entirely. After 3 decades of being in front of cameras every single night, he was finally free to be alone, to be private, to be himself. In 1999, Johnny had quadruple bypass surgery. His health was declining. The emphysema from all those years of smoking was catching up with him. On January 23, 2005, just 3 months after his 79th birthday, Johnny Carson died peacefully, surrounded by his family and friends. The legacy. Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for exactly 30 years, from October 1st, 1962 to May 22, 1992. During that time, he received 6 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, a Golden Globe, the Television Academy's Governor's Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and a Kennedy Center honor. He was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 1987, but the awards don't capture what Johnny Carson really meant to America. For 3 decades, he was the person Americans turned to at the end of the day. When everything else in the world felt chaotic or uncertain, there was Johnny, reliable, funny, familiar. He gave people permission to laugh, to relax, to forget about their problems for an hour. Every late-night host who came after Johnny owes him a debt. He created the template they all follow. The opening monologue, the desk, the sidekick, the interviews, the sketches. The format of The Tonight Show became the format of late-night television, period. But more than that, Johnny showed how powerful television could be as an intimate medium. Even though millions of people were watching, it somehow felt like Johnny was talking directly to you. That connection, that ability to make mass communication feel personal, was Johnny's greatest gift. In terms of career longevity, popularity, peer respect, and impact on the medium, Johnny Carson ranks with Lucille Ball and Jackie Gleason as a television great. But unlike those two, who were larger-than-life personalities both on and off screen, Johnny remained an enigma. The man behind the curtain was never fully revealed. What fans never figured out. So what did most fans never figure out about Johnny Carson? They never figured out that the man they saw every night on television was playing a role. Not in a dishonest way. Johnny was genuinely funny, genuinely quick-witted, genuinely interested in his guests. But the confident, outgoing, sociable person on screen was a performance. The real Johnny Carson was shy, introverted, uncomfortable around people. He was lonely despite his fame, troubled despite his success, unknowable despite being the most recognizable person in America. Fans never figured out that Johnny needed that distance. He needed the camera between himself and other people. He needed the structure of the show, the control of the format. That's where he felt safe. That's where he could be himself, paradoxically, by not being himself. Fans never figured out that making them laugh every night for 30 years took everything Johny had. When the show ended, he was drained. That's why he'd rush to his car with a palpable sense of relief, as his writer described it. That's why he avoided parties and didn't socialize. He'd given everything to the audience, and there was nothing left over. Fans never figured out that Johny Carson was, in many ways, the unhappiest person in the room, just like his idol Jack Benny had been. Success hadn't brought him peace. Fame hadn't brought him connection. Wealth hadn't brought him joy. He remained that shy kid from Norfolk, Nebraska, who felt most comfortable when he was performing a magic trick, creating an illusion, keeping people at arm's length while appearing to let them in close. And maybe that's why Johny Carson was so good at what he did. He understood loneliness. He understood the need to be entertained, to be distracted, to laugh at the end of a hard day. He understood what people needed because he needed it himself. So every night, he went out there and gave it to them, even though it cost him more than they ever knew. If you enjoyed learning about what made Johny Carson really tick behind that famous smile, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories about the legends who shaped American entertainment.